Hello, everyone. You are listening to SheLeads with Carly. I'm your host, Carly Mulatsky, and my guest today is Michal Levin. Michal is currently the Vice President of Product at Hero, a medtech company that is on a mission to help take the hassle out of taking meds for patients and caregivers with the first end-to-end medication management service. Prior to Hero, though, and prior to even being directly in a product-facing role, Michal's professional career focused mostly on user experience. She was a UX design lead and manager at well-known companies including Tzur, Modu, Google, as a first UX hire in Israel, by the way, and Zoox, and then transitioned to health and biotech sector as the head of UX for medical devices at Verily Life Sciences. So we will get into all of this, obviously, but first, Michal, it's so great to have you on the show. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here. Good to see you.
Of course. Yes. So first, set the scene. Where are you in the world? How's the work set up with all, COVID and everything happening? What's going on?
Yeah, great question. So I live in Sunnyvale, California. And as you mentioned, I worked at Hero Health, which is a healthcare startup that actually works at a remote first capacity. So I mostly work at home, but I also travel every couple of months for, in-person meetings, work sessions, and so on. And yeah, that's basically it.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to go all the way to, back a couple of years when you were in UX. You started in user experience. How did you get into it? And first, also explain, what is user experience? I know it's very broad, but also pretty focused. So tell me a little bit more.
Yeah, that takes us, I think 17, 18 years ago when I started getting into UX. It's actually a funny story. It kind of happened, I don't know, coincidentally, but it goes back after I finished my army service, actually. I got into a tech company and I joined as a QA. And again, 17, 18 years ago, UX wasn't as established as a discipline in Israel. So I was born and raised in Israel. This is where I was at the time. So I joined as an SQA, and back then, engineers were actually building the UX, basically, how the interaction and all of that works. And I was working as a QA, and I started noticing that as part of my work, kind of organically, I started having questions of why do we have all these menus, and why is this working like this, and why is the flow like that, and started getting into kind of all these conversations with the CTO about usability and UX, but again, very, very, very early days. But that's how kind of the seed got rooted in my mind. Fast forward a couple of years, I actually started going to university, and I started computer science and business management. I was kind of trying to think what I wanted to do with my life. And halfway through my degree, I actually decided that computer science per se is not what I want to do. I really wanted something that combines technology, but being more people-oriented and kind of more of the combination of technology and art. So I started this journey of soul searching and kind of thinking what I wanted to do, and I ended up landing on actually going for 2 bachelor degrees. So I continued with my business management, but I added to it psychology and communication studies. And as I was going through all these studies, I was like, okay, what am I going to do with all these degrees? And at that point, honestly, I was kind of there's this UX thing that I started looking into a couple of years back. And I said, I think I can be good at it, and I think I would really enjoy it. So honestly, one Saturday, I just decided that I'm going to give it a try. I opened Google, and I just searched for all the UX companies in Israel, and I just applied to all of them. And luckily, I got invited to some interviews, and I ended up landing at Tzur, which was really my entrance to the UX world. And I stayed here since. It's a wonderful world.
Wow. So, okay, a core part of UX is obviously being in the shoes of the user, right? So even in that first process, in interviews and things like that, to get your foot in the door, how are you expressing that? How do you show that, you have this empathy and this, in the feet of the user? How do you show that?
Yeah, it's a really hard thing to do, especially when you build things for millions of people and you have a lot of different humans and a lot of different people. I think kind of reflecting on my journey, I would say, one thing that I keep on doing, and I do it regularly, even today from where I sit, at Hero, I talk to members regularly. I think talking to people, listening to them, understanding their day-to-day is really, really important, what they like, what they don't like, how their life is looking like. I read every user feedback that comes in, and we have NPS and reviews and app ratings, all of that. Like, I always read it, I always look at it, I follow up on some of these. I look at data. That's another thing. We really want to kind of like bring together the qualitative data with the quantitative. So, I think at every company that I worked at, we had a pretty strong data team that you can really kind of like start looking at behavior patterns and engagement. And again, these are all signals that you can learn from, because you kind of also want to keep in mind that what people say they would do and what people say when they speak to you at a certain context doesn't always represent what they actually do in real life. So we kind of like want to bring two together, get the base insights out of that. The last thing I would say is just like I read a lot about behavioral psychology. I think this is an area I'm fascinated by, and we actually have a behavioral scientist on the team that informs the way we go about product. I talk to experts, and I think the most important thing to me, and I think that has been my kind of like the way I approach UX and product, is to always ask the why. So it's really going back to the first principles and trying to understand, why are we doing what we're doing? What are we trying to solve? Really kind of like go back to that, not just look at what others are doing, looking at the features and trying to get at parity. Looking at the market, you want to see what's out there, but you always need to go back to kind of like, okay, what am I trying to solve? What is the core problem? What are we like best set up to do? And always start from there. And I think over the years, as I worked on more and more products and I got insight into people and, what works and what doesn't work and how people behave in this, like in this situation, you start over time to just build sort of a gut or a sense of kind of like how people experience things, what works. And I think that is, a part of the job. It's not all data. Some of it has to be kind of like that gut, that informed knowledge that you acquired along the way.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating actually to hear you talk about even the scientific approach that can come into it. Like reading about behavioral science, like all of that can contribute to the decisions you make, which is very cool, and you wouldn't think that.
Exactly.
So in this moment, at this stage in your career in UX, what was your relationship like with the product manager? Because I know obviously as a PM, it's very important also to talk to the users, look at data, all the pointers that you mentioned. So what was that like? How did you work together?
Yeah. So the great things about Google, which has been kind of like a big chunk of my career, and especially when it comes to kind of like this gradual transition or expansion from UX to product, I was fortunate enough to work very closely with a lot of like super talented PMs. So at Google, the environment is very collaborative. So every project always has this like holy triangle of UX, PM, and Eng. And that group works together constantly from the very early stages of the product, whether it's a product that you build from the ground up or a product that you want to improve and keep developing. All the early discussions, identifying user needs, which of course a lot of it is also done by UX, brainstorming, iterating on design, iterating on the features, how to prioritize, all of those things have been done in a very close collaborative manner. And I think through that, I had, kind of like the opportunity to really get exposed and learn and absorb a lot of that just by working so closely with people who are so smart and so strong. And I think a lot of it kind of like really stuck with me.
Yeah.
And I would just say kind of like, and you just said it, right? Like fundamentally, I think there is quite a bit of overlap between what product is about and what UX. You want to build the right thing and you want to build it right, and you want it to be driven by user needs, by solving real problems, right? Going back to those roots. And I think this is fundamentally what drives UX and product decisions. So there's kind of like a lot of overlap there naturally.
Yeah. I just thought now, as you're building new products, even for new entrepreneurs, at what point do you think, it's necessary and, required to get a UX, someone specifically for user experience rather than, maybe a product manager to take care of the whole product? Is there a point where maybe, now you need a UX, or do you think maybe at the same time you need a UX and a PM at the same time?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I kind of like I get asked that a lot. The way I think about it, I guess I don't necessarily think about it as a person that you hire. Like it depends on the team and who are the founders, what is the stage of the company. I would say like you want that discipline and that state of mind from the get-go, right? Because at the end of the day, you want to solve real problems, you want to understand people's needs and goals and pain points, and that is like how you start. Now, oftentimes, especially in the entrepreneurial world, the founder themselves are people who kind of like observe the problem or experienced it themselves in a personal way, and it kind of like made them realize there is a bigger thing here. And it starts from that very basic UX, user focused, personal experience that kind of like really expands into a company. This is, by the way, how Hero started. But again, very, very early on, you need to deploy those attitudes and user-centered approach to everything that you're doing, because it starts with kind of like with your own idea and your own observation. But then as you scale, you do need to kind of like understand the market, and you need to understand kind of like, where are people at, and how do you kind of like go about that. So I would say the user-centered approach needs to be there from the get-go. Do you need to hire a full-time UX person or a full-time product manager? That depends on a lot of different things, but I definitely think that this is where things kind of like start.
Yeah. So, okay, at this point, when did you start to think about product? Or at least, maybe the product manager role is more of a better fit for you? Because I know you went to Google, and then even after that, you started to transition to biotech sector with Verily. So when did this start to sneak in where you were like, maybe I should, focus on product specifically?
Yeah. I think when I try to kind of like reflect back, I would say probably most prominently during the past maybe 6 or 7 years, especially, when I joined Zoox and then Verily, kind of like in both of these companies, I find myself just like organically getting deeper and deeper into product management. So there was just like, certain gaps in that area, which gave me the opportunity to really step up and incorporate product leadership into my hat as the UX lead. Kind of like with that opportunity, I kind of like really, really expanded my responsibilities and got the opportunity to get a lot more involved in that. And I really enjoyed that. So it wasn't so much kind of like a binary decision, like I wanna go into product. It just kind of like evolved. And when I saw a gap and I felt like I can kind of like, try and help with that, that's what I did. And yeah, that's kind of like how I got into it. But as you mentioned initially, Hero was what I call like my official leap over the fence to truly kind of like wear that hat officially, not just being the UX lead that also does all the product, but actually being the product lead. So at Hero, I actually manage product management, user experience, and member support. So, I'm still very much in the UX space, just kind of like having this umbrella of the end-to-end journey of a member from start to end, and kind of like really overseeing that entire journey.
Wow. So before we even get into the fact that your leap into product was in a VP role, which, brings its own challenges in itself, but what was something that you can pinpoint that was such a big shift in, how you approached a product or whatever it may be from that, in that leap from UX to product? What did you have to really learn to do? Or maybe there wasn't, but what was that transition like?
Yeah, there is always learning, right? And I'm still learning and I'm still growing. And I think that's part of it, right? I always kind of like, we all live in a world of like, and surrounded by really, really smart and talented people. So, we can question ourselves, and imposter syndrome. And I remember even before I took this role, I had this like uncomfortably excited part of me, and that kind of like, this is a term at Google that usually refers to like, how do you know an idea is big enough, is if you feel uncomfortably excited about it, because then it kind of like,
wow, I love that,
can make a difference in the world. I feel it also applies to kind of like your personal choices. So I kind of like had that, excitement and anxiety, but I kind of like felt that was the right spot for me to be at, to really kind of like take that leap and continue growing. I think when you truly, I'll give you an example maybe that kind of like maybe manifests that. I think some things that I was concerned about actually ended up being fine. And I saw again, kind of like a lot of the skills and practices that I absorbed by being in a in such a mature company and well-functioning one like Google just gave me all these skills. Like one example is just like, how do you set up an OKR process, which is actually something that is not trivial, but I've done that so many times in collaboration with product, with Eng, at Google, at Verily, in different like levels of complexities of the product, that I could come to like a startup environment and set it up in like a month and get everybody kind of like working under that practice, which was amazing. I think some of the things that I can see that they are the challenge, in UX and also in product, but I can speak about it from the UX standpoint. We always say, look, you cannot build an experience that is 100% perfect for 100% of the users. You always need to understand what are the main use cases, what is the primary need that you're trying to solve. You're really optimizing for that, recognizing that there's other cases that you need to support. So I think the same goes for product, right? You need to be very, very mindful on what you are prioritizing. There's a ton of things that you can build, but everything requires resources and time, and how do you prioritize the right things? And one of the things that I felt as I took on the product role, and as I mentioned, I look at every little feedback that comes in. I could feel initially, you get feedback, and a lot of feedbacks is, are great, and, it's life-changing, but there's also, things that don't work as well, and people want this and want that, and this is not working like as they expect. And there is this like inclination, because it's really hard, right? Like you're really passionate about what you're doing. You really want to build a great experience. And you need to be very disciplined in not like jumping on this and solving it because one person said it. And again, I know it, and it has been a lot easier to manage that when I was on the UX side and looking at things kind of like from the side and saying, no, but we need to prioritize it. And suddenly when you are in charge of the product, like that's your baby. You are responsible for it. You suddenly feel how different it is, and you need to be super, super disciplined. So I know I was kind of like, okay, yes, I hear it. I recognize this is great feedback, but I have to kind of like put it within its kind of like broader picture and, prioritize. But I definitely felt kind of like that challenge initially. But yeah, that's kind of like part of it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. First of all, I love the term uncomfortably excited. I'm going to use that, and I'm going to use that as a measure too. I really love that. But second, what you mentioned of, now looking at a bigger picture, I see that also even with my work in that, the UX, they could have, many ideas and many features. And then as the engineer, that's a lot. And there's, a different perspective. So how do you... Because now you have to motivate the engineer and the UX designer. How do you balance those two? Does that come into play where you find yourself like maybe doing different messaging to each role?
It's a great question. I have to say, look, I'm a big believer, everybody, I started out by saying it all starts with the why. And I feel very, very strongly that everybody needs to understand the why. It's not about, product giving UX a spec and they need to build the mocks, and you give mocks to engineers and they need to code it. All of us together have to understand why we're doing what we're doing. Why are we prioritizing these things? Why are we building it this way? Very, very important for me, even if people don't ask. I always start with that because I think it's really, really important for everybody to be proud of, understanding, and passionate about what we're doing, and just like understanding the bigger picture. Otherwise, you're kind of like, just like executing, and I think that's not as productive or as fulfilling. So I don't know if like necessarily at the bigger picture I have different messages. I think the way we think about the product, the way we are prioritizing the decisions that we are making, I always explain that. I explain either like the data behind it, or the assumptions, or the learnings, or the user feedback. So everybody is aligned. If there are questions, I want us to discuss it. And also early on, there are a lot of different ways to solve a problem. There is no one truth and one like perfect design. You can go about it in different ways. So you kind of want that creative brainstorm and ideation. And also all of us are users, right? So everybody kind of like has something that they think or, have some inclination around. So I think at a higher level, the story is probably the same. Then when you get one level deeper and it's more like the execution details and giving more kind of like guidance around, then it can be kind of like based on the function, because with UX, you would talk about maybe like the details of the graph and typography and information hierarchy. maybe these are details that don't matter as much to the engineer, but with the engineer we'll talk about like the logic and how the different edge cases are managed and how we think about the UX, like approach overall. So there's kind of like that level that is more like function oriented, but I think overall the product story, the product prioritization, the narrative is something that I try to kind of like make sure that everybody is aligned around, and has a voice in.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. I think even, as an engineer, also knowing the purpose and why we're doing something, that helps so much, right? Rather than just getting a design spec and saying, do this and this needs to be done now. I think that adds so much value to be like, okay, our users need this because XYZ or something like that. So that it really helps.
Yeah.
So right now as VP, obviously you're hiring, you're looking at different, people that want to come into product. How do you now take into consideration those who maybe don't have this product management experience beforehand? So, right now you kind of see two different levels. One, early graduates, right out of college, APM program versus like 7+ years of experience. And so I know given your story, you were heavily involved in product as UX, but do you have advice or tips for those who maybe don't have that, real product experience but want to break in?
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I got the opportunity at the early, like, my UX career started by someone making a bet on me, right? Like, I joined a UX agency with having, like, practically zero experience. I had no portfolio, right? Like, this is something that today is almost like, outrageous. Like, it would be really, really hard. And I still remember that, and I'm thankful for that. And I think a lot of the things that I'm trying to develop, and it's not easy, right? Like, how do you identify this like tiny like diamond in the rough? Like, how do you really like try and identify this rock star talent that you just need to help and support and mentor, and they will become like the rock stars of tomorrow? It's not easy, but I think it's a very like well justified investment. And again, that's kind of like what helped me build my own career. I think fundamentally, again, it goes back to me to kind of like how people think. And I think by seeing, do they ask the right question? Do they challenge themselves? How do they respond when you kind of like give feedback or ask like follow-up question, or kind of like make them think about the problem differently? Do they get defensive? Do they take a step back? Like, I think, how people think, what I call like a growth mindset, really kind of like taking feedback as something that you don't kind of like take, personally. You kind of like take it as an opportunity to actually like learn and grow and think differently. Those are some of the core skills that I'm looking for. Critical thinking, as I mentioned. And with every hiring process, I always, I'm a big believer in giving some exercise, not something that people need to spend like 3 days on, but something that can really like get us to feel how they approach a problem, not just by talking about it at a high level and kind of like in an interview setting, but also like taking it and applying it on a real problem. So I think those are some of the things that I'm looking at that are really important for me, and I think they do give an opening to people who might not have the official experience at a certain domain.
Right.
But if they can exhibit those skills, I would definitely love to kind of like invest and go on that journey together.
Yeah. How important is it when seeing if the person is passionate about the product? For instance, even when you got Hero, the opportunity to be VP of product, how are you playing against, I'm very passionate about what their mission is and what they're doing versus, here's my chance to be a VP of product versus like, how do those play a role?
Yeah, it's probably, a personal question that different people will answer in different ways. I can speak for myself. As you might see, I'm very passionate about what I do. I feel very, very fortunate that throughout my career, I was able to be part of things that I truly believe in. Like that's part of what gets me going. I would say that especially at a startup environment, I think it's actually incredibly important. I think it's, I'm very much mission driven. I'm very passionate. I think that passion and belief is so, so important. Because as I mentioned, on one hand, it's kind of like gets you energized on a day-to-day basis, but I also think it's really important to get through the hard times And a startup is a roller coaster. You see like where we are in the market today, like it's not easy. And to
Yeah.
get through those hard times, you need something more than just kind of like the externalities. And I think the true belief in like we are doing something that changes people's life, like it saves people's lives. Like we have to make, we really want to make it happen. We have to make it happen. It makes a difference. That type of conviction and belief, I think, is so important to just be able to cross that journey successfully, or at least have like the most chances. Otherwise, it's just really hard. So
Yeah.
that's kind of like work to me is more
Yeah.
than work. I love what I do, which makes it basically how people say it's not a job, right? Because it's kind of like it's part of what you do and what you're passionate about. But I think it just really is important to be in a place for a long time.
Yeah, I love that. I think going off of that, you not only, leapt into product and VP of product, but also during COVID, right? And like you said, you guys are remote. There's a lot of different challenges that come, and probably the future of work is even going to go more towards remote, as we've seen with different companies. So, how was that process like where, you're going into a new role, new team, motivating new members? How was that? What were challenges? What were some things that you faced?
Yeah. Well, one thing I would say, and I don't know if it sounds strange, but I almost felt that it was to some extent an easier decision to do because of the pandemic, because I was kind of like, the whole world is going crazy. Like, I don't know, it felt like it kind of like was a point where I think a lot of people took a step back and reevaluated their lives and where they're at,
Yeah.
where they want to be. There was like a lot of people who changed where they live, and I was like, who knows? Like, and it's kind of like I do have to say, about 6 years ago, I did like one thing that I would say I made a very intentional shift of my career towards healthcare. So that was a very cognizant decision. I went with some personal experiences that made me just decide that I want to utilize my skills to save people's lives at scale. And that's what I'm here to do. That's what I have done when I kind of like, joined Verily and now and joined Hero a year and a half ago. So it's still kind of like very much in me. But I feel kind of like, it just felt like so many things are changing, so many things are just like different, and I might as well make the change. I kind of like, I don't know, it made me feel less afraid, if that makes sense. So I don't know, it's because I already have been working. So I transitioned to Hero kind of like in the middle of the pandemic. So I already went through this process of moving from an office environment to a remote environment. So I was kind of like in that state, and then I just kind of like I started in a new company. Obviously it's not easy, but just like a lot of video chats, one-on-one conversations. When travel
Right.
opened, we started meeting in person. Yeah, I don't know, I didn't feel that was a huge barrier again, because I think the whole world was in that state, so it just felt like the new normal. And you kind of like just think of ways to keep, again, like improving and enhancing the human connection within that environment. And I think, again, it's not a Hero specific thing, it's an industry specific or an industry wide
Yeah.
challenge. Like, how do we create these human connections and connectedness within our companies, even when people are remote? But I guess it didn't feel as different, given that I was already in that state.
Yeah. Yeah. I think also everyone, like you said, everyone was going through this, right? Everyone was going through the pandemic. Everyone was going through remote and Zoom and one-on-one online. Like it was all crazy. But I think having everyone go through it together, that made it probably easier and probably better to, want this interaction and this connection. So it makes sense a lot. Okay, Michal, I have to ask, as I do at the end of every episode, what is your favorite product and why?
So I can talk about my recent most favorite product, probably for the past year or two. One of the products that really impressed me is actually Lemonade, the
Oh, okay.
insurance company. I honestly, I think they are phenomenal at everything that they're doing. Like fundamentally, the fact that they took a product that is kind of like dry type of product, insurance, like
Yeah.
he kind of like thinks much of it or tries to kind of like avoid it. They made it sexy, they made it attractive, they made it something that you want. I just like, And I just think they do phenomenal work at all the different levels, like, the product, their growth, their design, their language, their tone of voice, their customer service. So I'm a customer, and I just love to see it. Like, every detail is so thought through and so good, and their branding, and just like super impressed by what they're doing. Really, really, really favorite.
Yeah, it's so funny because as soon as you mentioned it, I was like, wow, insurance. I feel like that's not so common. Like you said, like it's very dry, not sexy. What do you think makes it sexy? Is it the website, like the design aspect, or what do you think is the most important aspect that really, drives the user?
Right. Well, it's never one thing, right? It's the whole thing. It's the end-to-end experience. They thought about every touch point. I see it, one example, like when you get their policy, I was mentioning kind of like their tone of voice. Their tone of voice is so friendly, conversational, fun, friendly, emojis, like personal. They're just like so good in their customer service. But they also, when you get the policy, you get it like bold, big letters, like font 100, and it says, "You're amazing." That's the title of their policy. And then they go through that. But it's just an example, though, how they rethink things, and they also tap into, again, humans. What do humans appreciate? How do you speak to humans in a way that really makes them excited and feel good about themselves and feel excited? And, they also did like phenomenal work with AI. They have like chatbot. Just like, honestly, it's not and it's never a one thing. It's a holistic approach to building a product from the ground up in a new perspective, with a new perspective, and really thinking through every element of the experience, from the website to the app to the printed materials to the customer service, all of it.
Yeah, wow, I love it. It also made me think of, obviously you're not based in Israel right now, but you're Israeli. So I'm sure you know of Wolt, which is the food delivery service in Israel. Mm-hmm. And it's so funny. I never considered it in the sense, but their customer service, every time they end with an emoji. And it's so funny because you do feel much more personal connection, and you feel, closer with the person, and as a result, you feel closer to it and you feel happier using the product. And so it's really interesting that the importance of that human connection like goes a long way, clearly. So that's really interesting. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, Michal, I have to say thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been such a pleasure. I've learned so much from you, and I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.